For centuries, academics laughed at the Australian legend of the Whowie, a giant man-eating lizard with 6 legs. They called it a biological joke, a fairy tale. They were looking at the wrong part of the story. The ancient hunters who actually survived this beast weren't counting its legs. They were counting the lines it left in the sand. This was Megalania, a giant monitor lizard that may have reached 7 meters and immense weight, heavy enough for its belly to drag across the dirt. 4 feet, 1 dragging belly, 1 massive tail, 6 lines. It reads like a survival record carried across 40,000 years. I'm the relic explorer. Today, we're not starting in a museum case. We're starting with the people who had to survive these animals. Set modern comfort aside for a moment. Central Australian desert, 40,000 years ago. Night. No artificial light. A wooden spear in hand, something moving beyond the fire line. Call it Whowie, call it by another old name. The point is the risk. And the deepest fear isn't only the encounter, it's the silence after if knowledge breaks. If one person dies, that is tragedy. If the warning dies too, where it hunts, where not to camp, where water hides in drought, the loss spreads. That is the scale. In the Pleistocene, memory wasn't decoration, it was survival. So how do you preserve critical knowledge with no paper, no tablets, no archive? You have voice. And voice is fragile. It drifts, exaggerates, drops detail. So ancestors did more than tell dramatic stories by firelight. They built disciplined ways to carry memory across generations, and over time, the monsters became maps. Let's look at evidence. Not only fossils, but memory with unusually specific detail. Western Victoria, Australia, country of the Chapurung people. Across generations, elders spoke of Mihirung Paringmal, giant birds, towering, dangerous, forceful. Some descriptions focus on scale and impact. Some evoke sound, low, heavy, resonant. For a long time, many researchers treated such accounts as symbolic stories formed after people found large bones. That view was influential. But the details deserve a closer read. These traditions don't only describe fear, they also preserve practical knowledge, including preparation. In some accounts, the meat is described as tough, requiring slow, controlled heat rather than quick roasting. That kind of detail matters. Procedure is a different kind of memory. Then archaeology enters the frame. Paleontologists identified Genyornis newtoni, a large flightless bird around 2 meters tall. At some sites, burnt eggshell fragments dating to roughly 45,000 years ago have been interpreted as signs of human interaction, possibly cooking. The exact timelines and interpretations are still debated. They should be handled carefully. But if even part of this overlap holds, one conclusion becomes hard to dismiss. Something practical survived in story. Not just fear of a giant bird, knowledge about how to handle one. And that possibility changes the way oral tradition should be read, not as just folklore, but as a serious carrier of ecological memory. Sometimes the goal isn't to defeat the monster, it's to survive contact. Back to the Whowie tradition, often compared with memories of a giant reptilian predator. Imagine the tactical problem. Huge body mass, heavy scales, cave shelter, ambush advantage. In that setting, a direct rush with wooden spears is a terrible gamble. Some Ngarrindjeri accounts describe tracking the creature to a cave near the Murray region, and then doing something smart, not going in. They built fires at the entrance. Smoke was pushed inward. They controlled conditions before attempting contact. In that sense, the story reads less like a lone hero duel and more like coordinated risk strategy. In some versions, the pressure is sustained for days. The sequence is patience, then timing. Wait until the animal is weakened, disoriented, forced out. Then act together, not one hero, a collective response. This matters. The point isn't to flatten oral tradition into a modern battlefield report. These narratives carry multiple layers: ecology, lore, memory, symbolism. But the practical logic is still visible. Understand the animal. Understand the terrain. Change the conditions and then move. Read that way. This isn't just a monster tale. It's a survival protocol in narrative form. It's easy to hear these stories and think, maybe they fought dangerous animals, but they didn't really interpret deep time. For a long time, parts of my own field leaned that way. From university labs, we often assumed formal science was the first real framework for studying the ancient past. That assumption doesn't hold as neatly as we once thought. In the 1960s, an archaeologist working in the Kimberley region of Western Australia was shown a sacred object carried by an Indigenous elder. At first glance, it looked like a charm. On closer inspection, it was a tooth. It was later identified as belonging to Zygomaturus, a giant marsupial, often described as rhino-sized, extinct for tens of thousands of years. And here's the striking part: that species is not known from the Kimberley. Chemical analysis suggested the tooth likely originated near Mammoth Cave in the southwest, roughly 2,000 kilometres away. 2,000 kilometres. So at some point, someone found that fossil, recognised it as significant, preserved it, and passed it on across generations and distance. Not as random stone, as meaningful trace. That isn't just myth-making. It is evidence of careful interpretation and custodianship of deep-time material. So maybe the world's first paleontologists is a provocative phrase. But this much is clear. Long before modern institutions, people were already reading fossils, valuing them, and carrying their meaning forward. So we have clues from multiple directions: recipes, tactics, fossil evidence. But the hardest question is still this: how does memory stay stable across deep time without writing? Play telephone with 10 people and a sentence collapses in minutes. Yet some traditions appear to carry place-based knowledge across millennia. One answer is songlines, and song can be a misleading translation if we hear it as entertainment. In many contexts, these are root memory systems, story tied to land, sequence tied to movement. A verse can encode a landform. Another can encode direction, water, season, or risk. When rhythm and wording stay precise, navigation stays precise. In many traditions, transmission is not casual. Custodianship is defined, accuracy is monitored, correction is expected. Not to suppress creativity, but because certain knowledge carries consequences. Shift a place marker in a drought landscape and people can miss water. That is not a poetic error. It is a survival error. This discipline may help explain why some coastal oral traditions align strikingly with sea level change from around 10,000 years ago. Scholars still debate mechanism, scope, and dating details. That debate matters. But one thing is hard to dismiss. These memory practices were structured, durable, and deeply tied to country. What was preserved wasn't just a monster image, it was a wayfinding logic for staying alive. We assume modern memory is permanent: internet, cloud, backups of backups. But then a hard drive fails, a website disappears, a decade of digital traces goes dark. Now put that beside ancient oral traditions. Memory carried in voice, place, rhythm, and responsibility. A living practice that endured climate shifts, rising seas, and the disappearance of megafauna. By comparison, our systems can feel strangely fragile. We outsource memory to infrastructure most of us never see and barely understand. Across much of ancient Australia, memory was anchored differently. In minds, in country, in relationship, in repetition. The Whowie is gone, Diprotodon is gone, but the map logic in story remains. Many elders say the land remembers, even when people forget. So here's the question I can't shake. If our networks fail, what knowledge remains speakable? What can still be passed on without power, without screens, without servers? What do we leave that can actually survive us? The monsters may be gone, The deeper miracle is the memory work that outlived them. I'm the Relic Explorer. Keep digging.